Welcome to Wit Reason, hosted by psychologist Dr. Alexis Moreno. Dr. Moreno brings her expertise to providing smart and practical explanations on human behavior by interviewing diverse health experts regarding today's ever-evolving life and culture, turning social science and research into relatable, accessible, and useful information you can use. Listen now as Dr. Moreno brings a little bit of positive mental health to your day.
I'm Dr. Alexis Moreno, and I'm sitting here with Phillip Reynolds, licensed clinical social worker who specializes in providing premarital counseling, marriage counseling, and even divorce counseling, if that's what it ends up coming to. We've been talking about some of the patterns we've been seeing among Americans where they're waiting longer to get married. As far as like longer in age. So people are starting to get married around like 28, 30. And then we're also looking at another group of Americans, the older population, those in their 50s and older who are increasing in divorce rates. And we're talking about everything in between. So like what does actual psychotherapy for premarital counseling look like? What does marriage counseling look like? And Phillip was able to talk to us a little bit about what psychotherapy is all about and his approach. And you even mentioned some sex differences in at least heterosexual relationships. You notice a lot of the times like guys tend to be a little bit more, what would you say, like dismissive or impatient.
Oppositional.
Oppositional.
Right.
Have you worked with couples in homosexual relationships?
I have one couple in a same-sex relationship,
okay.
But I don't get many referrals or many clients coming in with that.
Yeah, and so if you're looking for, if you're the LGBTQ community and you're looking for people that specialize in psychotherapy with LGBTQ relationships, check out the DC Center if you are here in DC. Otherwise, you could check out psychologytoday.com and you could specify that you would like someone who specializes with LGBTQ issues. And I mean, just like any relationship, any marriage, we're going to have our challenges. And across the board, we talked about how communication is just something that's so very much needed, but not a lot of us are very skilled at it.
Right.
I still struggle with it, even though I've been in 13 years of college, like practicing psychology and how to talk to people.
Right.
But especially when you're in the heat of the moment, like it feels like all of your frontal lobe, all of your executive functioning just dissipates, and it's all the emotional stuff.
Right, absolutely.
And it comes out in your communication.
Everybody's great at communication until they have to do it.
Right, until they have to do it under stressed circumstances, right?
Oh yeah, and what's a higher stress level than arguing with your partner?
Right.
I mean, we leave rationality very quickly.
And then it's just flooded with emotions.
Right, absolutely.
When I first got engaged, I was getting all of these tips about never go to sleep angry, and and I'm like, but dude, I've studied this stuff and I've worked with couples when they're super heated, and I know that if you're super angry, talking about it may not help you come to a solution. You know, you might, and if it's late at night and you have class or work the next day, you might need to take a break.
Right.
Yeah. So how do you respond to those types of
it's
sayings, old school sayings or something?
I think they're good in theory, much harder in practice.
Yeah.
And I think the idea is fundamentally don't just let it drag on, right? So a day, we try to come back to it and try and have another conversation and have it go better. 2 days. But when you're talking, recently had a couple where the boyfriend got upset and he didn't talk to his girlfriend for a week.
Yeah.
They had one conversation and then he didn't talk to her for another week.
Yeah.
And it's like, we can't do that.
It's too long.
It's too long. And, the idle hands, the devil's playground. Well, what's going on in your head when you've had these conversations and you've had this argument and he leaves for a work trip to Vegas tomorrow?
Yeah.
I mean, you start having all types of wild thoughts about what's going on or what could happen and that one work wife or, the whatever.
Yeah.
So I think not letting it linger too long and trying to find ways to come back to it, trying to find ways to kind of resolve some of that intense anger, let the emotions come out. And I'll tell couples, if it's easier to do it through email, send an email to each other before you get home from work. Try to take the emotions out of it. Try to talk more about how you're feeling. Shoot an email and discuss that when you get home. Find some way to kind of unpack the emotion so you can come back and have a real conversation about it.
Yeah, I think that breaks are definitely helpful when it's like super heated. One suggestion that I give to people is that when you're taking a break, that does not mean you're just walking out the door in the middle of a heated conversation, right? Because that looks very much and feels very much like abandonment, which could bring up a lot of triggering stuff for people.
Right. You need to be able to say, okay, things have escalated to a point. I think we should take a break.
Right.
I'm going to do A or B. How does that sound? Great. Let's take a break. Let's come up with an agreement.
And preferably like a timed estimate.
Right,
like,
a time break.
I need to go for a walk for like 10 minutes.
Right. Right.
So that way the person has some kind of expectation about like what's going on and that they're reassured that, you're not just like leaving.
Right. Let's come back to this later.
And then that's the trick.
Right.
So
coming back to it.
When you go out, take a mental break. Don't even necessarily keep on ruminating over these issues. But try to take as much of a break as you can. And then when you come back, you're not just like, okay, everything's fine now. You're actually still working on it.
And understanding, okay, this has become bigger than the both of us are able to handle. There's a lot of emotion here. We need a third party.
Yep.
That third party, it can often be a therapist. I've had people call up and say, hey, can we come in? Can you fit us in? I know we haven't seen you before, but we're having an intense conflict.
Yeah.
It could be a really good friend that you can have come in and help. It can be clergy. It can be whatever, but try to find as much as possible, a neutral third party. I have a couple where the mother-in-law is trusted and can be unbiased. And so they'll bring her in to have those conversations. She's full of wisdom and great advice. And so I think in that situation, in no situation would I say the first person you go to should be your mother-in-law. In this situation, yes.
It depends,
But, most situations, the mother-in-law says, yeah, I'm a perfect person. Come see me.
Right.
It's just not a good fit. But sometimes it bubbles over and it gets to the point where, okay, now we need somebody else objective to come in and that's a perfect opportunity to go and say, hey, let's get some couples counseling.
Yeah. And you know what has been your experience when you make that recommendation? Because a lot of times people are just super private, especially about their marriage and very protective about it. And it could seem very risky to disclose those types of arguments, to a third person.
Right.
Even if
that's why I say it has to be a trusted person. It can't just be anybody. It has to be somebody that knows your life, can speak into your life well. And if not in your private setting, to get a therapist intervention who is objective, who doesn't necessarily pick sides and go that way. So I know it can be tough. But what's even tougher is continuing to battle this out without the resources and skills. Being emotionally drained in a relationship argument can happen very quickly.
Yeah.
That relationship argument lasting multiple days on end can be very, very draining and excruciating. So it's finding some way to get some relief in there is important.
Yeah. I was smiling while you were talking about a trusted, objective person because I want to highlight those pieces.
Right.
And that you're bringing it into the couple to talk about.
Right.
Because what happens a lot of the time is people want to vent about their marital problems or relationship problems, and guess who they go to?
They're single friends.
Some hot person at work or something like that. You know, I mean, even their single friends, but especially when we start thinking about like the risks for like adultery, or emotional cheating, as people would call it as well, is that you don't want to necessarily we're not suggesting you bring all your marital problems to just anybody, or even to that like attractive friend that you have. You want to bring it to someone who you trust, who's objective, who's not trying to stray you away from the relationship.
No ex-boyfriends.
Right. Oh my gosh.
There's so many people that have, I'm great friends with my ex-boyfriend. Cut it out now. End it quickly. Because you're going to get yourself in a tough spot, and they're going to be compassionate and caring and, I was never that type of, cut it out. End them quick.
Yeah. So you want to bring in someone who's objective, and then you're working on it like together as a unit.
Absolutely.
Both partners, the objective party, hashing it out.
Right.
And if you don't have that person in your life, you like look at all the people, in your family or friends, and you're like, crap, slim pickings here, not a whole lot of healthy relationships going on. That's where a trained professional psychotherapist, who could come in and play that kind of referee.
And I think every couple should have a another couple that they're friends with, that they do life with, that they can have those conversations that's meeting those challenges as well, which is why it's tough being the first couple married out of your friend group.
Yeah.
Because now they're all single and they're doing these other things, and maybe that relationship ends. He's talking about all this single life and everything else. And so I think it's finding another couple you can do life with, that you can share, that you can give that information with, that's mature.
Yeah.
And even if it's an older couple that's kind of mentoring you, you go and get a job, you find a mentor, right? You want to find somebody that knows how to do this, somebody to look to. And if it's not your parents, there's an older couple or someone that you can build a relationship with that can speak into your marriage and help give you that sound advice that you need.
Right. And that's the thing. Like we do this on all other aspects of our life. We have a coach in sports, you know, as you mentioned.
Just think about parenting, right?
Yeah.
A first-time mom, she talks to 50 different mothers about what do you do, and she's going to get 50 different answers and get frustrated with all the information and all the bias and all the advice. But you're talking to other people because you don't know how to do this. You've never been married before. And if you've been married before and you're on your second marriage, obviously it didn't go well.
Yeah.
So now how do we do this?
You need to change, not the other person.
How do we do this and make it go better?
Yeah.
And so I've been talking to a friend of mine who's recently divorced, is back out there, and she's trying to find folks. And I'm like, you're 40. You're finding 40-year-olds. They've probably ended one marriage at this point in time, or even scarier, they're 40 and they've never been married. So you're going to have to ask a different set of questions. That's like your wheelhouse is to find the widower, somebody that could be in a relationship for 12 years and it didn't end because they were so terrible. Something happened to their partner, but they're still a good guy. I was like, the pickings get slimmer the older you get in this thing. And so find the questions to ask, because you have that inset. This is who I am. This is who I'm going to be. And that's what you're trying to figure out a way with. And it just gets tough. And
then if you are in your older years of dating, I don't know what's a nice politically, it's a great way to say that.
late 50s.
Well, actually, there's another great podcast called Gray and Dating.
Okay.
And it's about this woman who, had been married since her 20s, and then is now newly divorced and single, and she's like in her 60s, and she's like, how in the world do I navigate this dating world? And so there's a lot of people out there who are older and dating, and there's slim pickings in the sense of like people have a lot more history now in this age group as far as a previous marriage, divorce, kids, family. So your questions while you're dating aren't necessarily whether or not you've been married or have you been divorced, but how did you handle that? What did you learn from it? The answer or response of like, oh, well, that person, my partner was crazy. That's a red flag.
I was having that conversation today. If the other person can't give you an answer as to why they're divorced that includes what they did wrong, that's a red flag. Okay, you have to be able to tell me you did something wrong, because no relationship ever ends just because of one person. Well, they were unfaithful. I was talking to a friend of mine, and he, she was saying that the guy, that's what she said, the partner was unfaithful, and then they get in a big argument, and then he stops talking to her for a week. And I was like, well, did you see any red flags or where that came from? And I imagine that his wife wasn't just unfaithful because she was looking to get some. I'm imagining that with the way he's presented, it was not being able to care well for her emotions. And eventually she made a poor decision, but it didn't come out of nowhere, because what he's shown is he's not even able to care well for yours. You were asking him a simple question, you had a simple need, and he stopped talking to you for a week. I got super defensive. And if he doesn't recognize that, the first step to working on a problem is owning that you have one, and you're looking to get married because you're 38 and you want to have kids soon and you want to be married. If he doesn't recognize the problem, the time between now and when he recognizes it, then the time between him recognizing it and being ready to getting married, and then having kids, you could be 2 or 3 years out before. Do you really want to start from scratch here? Or do you want somebody that owns and is more mature and recognizes their issues? And that's another thing with dating too, is that like how much investment do you put into somebody who's not quite there yet? Who still has some stuff to work through, and that's on a case by case situation. And then doubling down on a bad investment. I've been with this guy since I was 20. It's been 7 years. He hasn't proposed to me, but getting out of this and starting over again because I'm now 27 and thinking about having kids. Well, that's scary. So maybe I just stay with him longer and bite the bullet. And then it's like, okay, now I'm 32, still not married, and I've wasted my youth on this person who's still not ready to make a commitment.
Yeah.
So now I've just doubled down on this bad investment, and here I am. What do I do with this?
Right. Or you end up getting married for all of the pressure reasons. You know, friends are getting married, friends are trying to have kids, you want the same thing, and that's not the healthiest way to jump into something like that, huh?
And now you're unhappy, and well, there's the divorce rate, right?
There it is, yeah. Okay, so let's talk about some prevention. Let's see. Okay, so we've talked about premarital, engaged couples, marriage. So let's focus on tips for each phase. Okay. So what tips would you have for newly engaged couples?
Wow. Newly engaged couples, I would say set up the boundaries of the relationship. So when there are problems, who you can and can't talk to, who you should or shouldn't talk to. I think that would be important. In-laws, keeping them on the outside and not engaged in the relationship.
Unless you're that objective person.
Right. Unless you have that objective, wise, person that's able to give some input. Other than that, being mindful of that bias, setting up boundaries for the relationship. How are we going to operate when we go on that girls' trip or that boys' trip? How are we going to check in with each other? How are we going to communicate with each other? How frequently do we want to have physical intimacy? It's something that should be discussed. How do we want to do this? It's always surprising to me when I have couples, and I have couples that have had sexless marriages. I think the longest one I had was 8 years sexless marriage. And I always ask them the same thing. How often would you like to be having sex? 3 or 4 times a week. How often would you like to be having sex? 3 or 4 times a week.
Well, there you go. Let's talk about sex.
But it's not happening. So let's have a conversation about it.
Yeah.
And so figure out what frequency feels healthy and appropriate for that stage in life and what you guys want to do and what you want to commit to. But kind of get all that stuff out and up front. If you're thinking about having kids, what do you want that to look like? Premaritally, before you get married. I was talking to a single buddy of mine who's not even thinking about getting married yet. He's been with this girl for 2 years. And I'm like, what kind of parent would she be?
Yeah.
You're marrying that too. That's coming in with you. So talking about parenting styles, what you want to bring to the table, discipline, how you see that public or private school, just having those conversations about the long-term trajectory and where you'd like to be.
And that needs to be a conversation. There's way too many times where people just assume that we're going to get married and we're going to have kids.
Right.
And that's not necessarily what everybody wants. That's not necessarily the lifestyle that everybody wants. And so unless you have that conversation, because that's a big lifestyle change.
It's huge, especially if you're getting married later on in life.
Yeah.
I'm a woman. I'm 38. I kind of want to wait a few years. I want to try. I don't have that kind of time. Biologically, I have this clock that is just humming in my head, and late, advanced stage, pregnancy and the risks involved with that. And so
for older guys too, that increases risk for things.
Right. Having that conversation. See, guys don't think about that. Though. Yeah. Guys just think, well, I can wait and I can do this until I'm 80 because, any 80-year-old can have a kid with a younger girl. I'm fine. It's like, well, what about your partner?
and then is that the path that they want to take?
Right.
Do they want to get a surrogate? Do they want to adopt? Do they want to have foster kids?
Right.
There's just so many beautiful options now these days that it deserves the respect of having that conversation.
Exactly. And then what happens if we have trouble conceiving?
Yeah.
So we've had this idea and this dream that we would, but what happens if we have trouble? Like you said,
happens a lot.
Do we surrogacy? Do we adopt? What do we do with that? And figuring out how you're going to care well for each other. I think I keep coming back to that. That's a fundamental aspect of marriage. How are we going to care well for each other in whatever circumstance may present itself?
Right, exactly. And even though having the conversation is important,
right,
you also want to look for these types of cues along your dating process. Right. How is that person with their nieces or nephews, with children? How are they with animals?
With parents.
How are they with their elderly parents or aging parents?
Right.
How, if at all, do they nurture another human being?
Right.
So you could have the conversation. People could say, oh, I want to have kids.
Right.
But do they understand and appreciate how that significantly impacts their life?
Right.
And do they have the emotional capacity to care for another human being and be responsible and make those sacrifices?
Right. And do you see them making those sacrifices for you?
Right.
There was one couple, they were married, they'd been 20 years in, and it was like, he's never done this for me. ever? Like, no, not even when we were dating. He didn't do this. But you're upset with him now because he's not doing something he hasn't done for 20 years of marriage.
Yeah. So what's that about? And why now?
I can even see you thinking you could change it, but we're 20 years in.
Yeah.
I don't know if you could be upset with him.
Yes. Okay. So that's my other big gripe. Okay. So we're just going to like have this be a therapist venting session.
Absolutely. Let's
go. Guys. Marriage doesn't change a relationship necessarily for the better.
Right.
What you're getting while you're dating, in many cases, is the best it's going to be.
Right.
You throw in marriage and you throw in all those other pressures and expectations in life with family and kids, and it gets harder, more challenging. And so if you're in the dating process and things are crappy, and you're like, well, we'll just get married and, everything will be better once we get married. No.
Right.
It's a piece of paper.
So a lot of those things that are present that you pay no attention to, or I can just deal with that, or it's not that bad, they get injected with steroids and they're 10 times worse once the door closes and you're in marriage and you're supposed to work it out and figure it out. And so all of those little things that are red flags, treat them as real red flags and investigate them. Yeah. Have conversations with them. See if there is a potential to grow in that area. I don't do really well with remembering holidays or special occasions.
I'm so bad with dates.
Are you committed to growing in that way?
Yeah.
Ask your partner that. Like, is that something that you're going to be able to do well? I think I do pretty well, but I'm just thinking about a guy that was just didn't remember anything.
That's me.
Birthdays, nothing. Okay, are you willing to grow?
Yeah.
Can you put it on a calendar and have it set? Can you go on ProFlowers and have automatic for? Can you do something to compensate?
Is the effort there?
Right. That's a win. Are you willing to work?
Yeah.
If you're not willing to work, we might have a problem.
Right. Okay, so now that someone's been married,
right.
And what tips do you have for like married couples? Well, let's start with like maybe newlyweds, and then we'll talk about the long term.
I think newlyweds, we talked about the boundaries and setting boundaries for other folks. I think
within like the first 5 years of marriage or something.
Right. Expectations around children, because usually, that's when you want to start thinking about that, where you want to live, career-wise, what are going to be the demands and the expectations. Don't commit to something professionally that you're not going to be able to sustain long-term for the relationship or for having kids. So being the guy that has an 8-hour-a-week job and I'm going to work, an 8-hour per day job, well, I'm going to work 12. Yeah. Or I'm going to work 15. But now I have kids and now my wife is staying at home and I'm still working 15 hours. Is that going to work? Are they still going to have that expectation of you? So you could put yourself in a situation where you become this model employee that everybody loves, and now you're down the line, you have kids, you have a different type of relationship. Well, now what do I do? Because now this is expected of me.
Right.
And so think about where you want to be professionally and everything else, and then kind of talk about and plan for that. As it pertains to now we've been married, we've been in this thing for 5 years, we're pushing 10, we're pushing 15. I think it's constantly coming back to the table and talking about communications. Yeah. In what areas am I satisfied, and what areas do I feel like you're caring well for me, and what areas do I feel like you could care better? Having those conversations. And so my wife and I recently, we came up with a list. These are the ways that I feel cared for. Yeah. How many of them are you actually doing? How many of them are actually present? And then are there ways that I can improve and grow in this area? And so I think it becomes important to sit back and evaluate your relationship over time and look at those things and have those hard conversations. Yeah. And it's very easy to get stuck in a pattern where you just stop doing things in a relationship. One of the biggest ones, like I said, for some of the couples I work with is just sex has stopped. Now we're a year into that or 2 or 3 years into that, and we're both frustrated with it. So
it's a long time to wait to solve a problem.
Right. Solve a problem like that. Yeah. That's an even longer time to wait. Yeah. And so what do we do? How do we rebound from that? How do we recover? Yeah. What do we want this relationship to look like, and what does it look like? And being able to have that dialogue and have that feedback, I think is important. And like we've been talking about, have that objective third party that can come in and deal with some of those conflicts that have been deeply set in our relationship, those patterns of behavior, so we can change them and be healthy and productive again.
Yeah. So some of the topics that couples should talk about are expectations, lifestyle expectations, work expectations, parenting or like, family expectations, sex.
Yes.
Talk about it.
Right.
Money is another big one.
It's huge.
Yeah.
It's huge.
Talking about money. So my husband and I have created Fudge Budge.
Okay.
Which is we bring in chocolate fudge.
Okay.
Some kind of chocolate treat, pastries.
Okay.
Probably some wine with that too.
Right.
And then we go over our budget.
Okay.
And we tried doing that once a month. That wasn't enough. So then we started doing it like bi-weekly.
Right.
So whenever we're getting paid, we're preparing for it. We know where the money's going. We know where the money went out.
Right.
And we try to have fun with it.
Right.
Because to me, it's like going back to work,
Right.
after working all day.
Yes.
But you bring in some chocolate and some wine and
It feels different.
yeah. Light some candles.
Right.
Bring in your budgeting spreadsheet.
Hey, baby, I got those numbers for you.
Exactly. But it's important, because otherwise one or the other person is just like feeling all the pressure to
Right.
handle it. Or, it's not being talked about and money's going out and no one's saying anything. So it's important to make sure that that's something that you have a real and honest conversation about. And we do know that as far as the divorce rates are concerned, money is up there. That
I think money
hits
is up there.
relationships in a big way.
And then it comes back to communication because
Yeah.
it's not communicating about money that becomes quite the complex dynamic. And so everybody has money. Everybody has a budget and blows budgets and goes over numbers. But how are we talking about it? How are we discussing it? Are we both on the same page? Are we both seeing the same things? Are either of us hiding anything?
Right.
So those all become important conversations. I think faith becomes an important conversation. I've had a number of couples where one was raised Jewish, another was raised Catholic.
That's like my husband and me.
Right. We've had kids. How are we going to raise our kids? Are they going to choose? Are we choosing? What's the expectation? Well, my mom really expects this, so this is what we have to do. And so being able to have those conversations are important.
Yes. Religion, spirituality, also important. Okay, so we talked about some tips for engaged couples, newly, and then even as you're going off in years, things just keep on checking in on those things. Now, you have some book recommendations too.
Right.
Passionate Marriage.
Yes.
That's one of my favorites as well.
Okay.
That's a good one. Intimacy and Desire.
Right.
And the 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work, John Gottman.
Right.
Oh, and then also Getting the Love You Want.
Right.
We'll have all of the links to get all of those on the website. I'm trying to remember if they use gender neutral language for the couples. I don't think they do for Passionate Marriage, if I remember correctly. Do you?
No, I think David Schnarch. I don't know how to pronounce that last name.
That's why I skipped it.
High five to you. I think he does in the Sex Crucible. I think he uses he flip-flops male, female, and interchanges it. I'm not sure about the rest of them.
Yeah.
And those are books that I read kind of early on
me too.
in my kind of professional life where I was like, I have to read everything because I have to know everything. And I think the biggest thing that has informed me, and I think it's the biggest thing that can inform other couples as well, is talking to other couples.
Yeah.
So I get the benefit, they come to my office and they pay me, but you can go out and you can talk to other couples because oftentimes we have this impression of what life is like for a couple because they present very well.
Yeah, especially now with social media.
Right. What's behind closed doors is quite different. And if you can get couples to open up and be vulnerable about the challenges they have, which includes some vulnerability on your part as well, I think you'll find that a lot more people are dealing with a lot more things than you think they are.
Right.
And they're quite similar. And, but everybody hides behind closed doors. I'm the only person on the planet dealing with the teen that's smoking pot in the house.
Right.
No, you're not.
Exactly. And so if you want to keep on reading things too, I also do like Love Languages by Dr. Gary Chapman. But check that out. And then they also have a new app that I need to check out. So we'll see how it is. Love Nudge. I thought that was interesting. And just check out our website, www.witandreason.com for more resources. Thank you so much for being here with us, Phillip. And thank you, of course, to DC Radio and for all of you listening. Stay posted on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter at Wit and Reason and DC Radio for our next show. I'm Dr. Alexis Moreno. Let's keep the conversation going.
You've been listening to Wit and Reason with psychologist Dr. Alexis Moreno. For more information, visit witandreason.com.